The wheel and the... Shoot, what's my line again?
It's Butterfly.
Right.
Stupid
Butterfly.
author.
Written by Justice 3442 and read...
It's written by you. How did you forget? Read by Justice.
And 3442. Chapter 39.5. Pinky and Dan versus Idaho.
It's the epilogue.
Just get to it. Pinky smiled exuberantly as she brought her running chainsaw down on a long, thin piece of wood sticking vertically out of the ground in the dark, starry night. Sawdust sprayed her black sweater and black pants as her saw made a neat diagonal cut through the wood. "Timber!" she shouted as a large blue "Welcome to Idaho" sign teetered forward and crashed on the ground. Dan grinned evilly as he turned over a rectangular large red metal gas canister and emptied a clear substance onto the sign. He handed Pinky a box of matches.
Would you like to do the honors? He asked,
smiling at the pink-haired woman. Pinky grinned wide with an audible squee and took the matches. She quickly lit one and flung it on the downed sign, which erupted in a blaze of fire. The two quickly made their way to the nearby red hatchback, laughing the entire way.
Our work is done,
Dan announced happily as he buckled his seatbelt, Pinky doing the same from the passenger seat. He reached into his pocket and handed Pinky a notepad. Pinky gleefully accepted the notepad and flipped towards the back. She flipped it to the page that read Idaho in glittery pink letters and enthusiastically scribbled over the state's name. "Sheesh," Pinky began. "Could you believe how many virgins they were going to sacrifice at that square dancing event?" Pinky said, looking across to Dan. Dan shrugged.
"They're square dancers. They're just bad people."
Dan started the car and turned to Pinky.
"Where to?"
Pinky paused and grinned mischievously. "My back is itchy." Dan smiled wide.
"Vegas, eh? I'll drive fast."
Dan pulled the car onto the highway and the red hatchback sped off from the scene of the crime into the night, its occupants giggling and chuckling at their victory over the gem state. Dan reached for a cassette tape as he drove on. He felt a hand on his and looked up into Pinky's smiling face. "I have a better idea," she said. "How many punk songs do you suppose you and I know?"
I'm not sure if we know 7 hours worth,"
Dan replied. He smiled wide.
"But I guess we'll find out."
Pinky beamed happily in reply. Dan grumbled from the couch as he was awoken by the flickering TV. An infomercial played starring people Dan would never care about, advertising nothing Dan wanted or needed. Pinky gently snoozed away in her pink dress, leaning against Dan's shoulder. Dan mumbled inaudibly to himself as he dragged a palm over his face.
Come on, Billy. We'll clean the bathroom tomorrow, all right?"
Dan irritably pleaded into the otherwise empty apartment. The TV shut off, leaving the roommates in darkness and silence on the couch.
"Stupid jerk ghost,"
Dan mumbled under his breath. Dan and Pinky had made it home after a couple of days of traveling and winning obscene amounts of money from casinos, and had sat down to relax together and watch some TV on their return. At some point, both Pinky and Dan had fallen fast asleep. Dan turned to the slumbering Pinkie Pie and sighed.
"Looks like it's my job to drag you to bed. Again."
He grabbed one of Pinky's arms and slung it over his shoulder, and then grabbed the other arm and placed its hand on the wrist draped by his neck. Dan bent down and shimmied an arm under Pinky's knees, and placed another on her back. Pinky giggled softly as Dan lifted her up. She instinctively held on tight and nuzzled herself into his chest as Dan began trudging towards the bedroom. Dan felt his heart beat quicken to an alarming pace at the contact, and he suddenly felt a warmness in his face he was unaccustomed to.
Am I having a heart attack?"
Dan made haste to the bedroom, stepping over expensive-looking silver cases that littered the ground of the apartment. He quickly but carefully deposited the sleeping Pinkie Pie on the bed. Pinky curled up on top of the covers and continued her gentle snoring. Small beams of streetlight eked in through the blinds across her pink dress, pink hair, and light skin. The hints of a smile at the corners of her lips. Dan turned and practically dove into the bathroom, feeling his forehead as the hot feeling continued and his heart continued to beat rapidly.
"Maybe I'm coming down with something."
Dan threw open the medicine cabinet and began unscrewing lids and depositing pills into his palm. He rushed out of the bathroom towards a kitchen sink, filling a glass with water, put the pills in his mouth, and then took a drink, swallowing the pills. A few seconds of attempting to control his breathing later, and Dan was back to normal. He breathed a sigh of relief and walked into the bedroom. The feeling hit Dan like a bus impacting an unsuspecting library patron, or a hatch to the back of a vehicle coming down on an unassuming gas station attendant's head. His heart leapt in his chest and he felt warm all over as he gazed at the sleeping figure of his roommate, snoozing and smiling to herself in the night as pink curls framed her sleeping face that glowed in the dim light.
Oh no.
Dan felt his world collapse around him. The last worn and weary barriers around his heart buckled and toppled. For the first time in quite some time, he felt scared and vulnerable. He turned and ran towards the apartment door. He flung it open and stepped into the cool California night, shutting it behind him. He balled his hands into fists, threw his arms into the air, and shouted at the heavens.
Love!
Thanks. What's my line?
Listeners.
Okay, listeners.
You gotta do the whole thing again.
Thanks for listening.